Thanks so much for joining us and good evening. If you've just switched on, this is 8 and 7 Prime with me, Cindy Mabi. Our top story this hour, ANC Councillor Xolani Sontashe has produced proof that shows the security upgrades at Mayor Patricia de Lille's home were partially paid for by the council. Invoices produced by a leader of the opposition in Cape Town Council contradicts Mayor Patricia de Lille. He showed media documents that indicate the city paid 104,000 rand of more than 700,000 rand upgrades to de Lille's private residence. The mayor says she paid for renovations at her residence, adding that she's prepared to provide the proof of payment. Sontashe was, however, blocked from presenting the evidence to a portfolio committee on security and social services. The committee chairperson ruled that Sontashe would not be allowed to speak on the matter.
This issue of the upgrades in the residence of the executive mayor, which taxpayers had to pay for that, because this matter is out there in the public. The mayor has lied to the public, and she told people that the city did not pay anything. She paid out of her own pocket. Here is the documentation. I don't know what she's going to say now. Here is the documentation detailing who has been paid what, when. And the rules of council and the regulations in terms of the Municipal Finance Management Act. Any amounts less than 200,000, you can go for deviations and do condonation to council. Anything above that, you need a consent from council.
A further rule that we don't allow Councillor Sontashe to speak on this matter today. Rather, redirect Councillor Sontashe to a proper platform, which is, is the Speaker's office, and then Councillor also submit in writing whatever issues that he has or the opposition has as a whip of this portfolio committee on the part of councillors of the opposition. Whatever concern or report, then the report will come will be shared among councillors. Then we will discuss such matters in a workshop or in a PC. So that is my ruling, and I'm asking the leader of the opposition to please respect my ruling so that we can continue to the next item.
Various versions on the controversy so far. Councillor J.P. Smith, security equipment installed irregularly at the mayor's home. Xolani Sontashe, the ANC MP, says invoices for 5 security barriers installed at the mayor's residence were sent to the city of Cape Town. And Mayor de Lille says she's paid for the renovations at her home and has the proof of payment to show for it. And the suspensions followed a public spat between de Lille and Smith over a special investigation unit, but the differences are not recent. Some believe that Saturday's Congress to elect a new provincial leader may have catalyzed the showdown, and J.P. Smith is one of 10 people vying for 3 positions as deputy chairman. And last year, Smith won the election as deputy chief whip in Cape Town. And Smith's election ended the influence of the former Independent Democrats members, a party de Lille led before merging with the DA. And shortly afterwards, de Lille tried to remove Smith from the City Management Committee, but refrained. The Democratic Alliance leader Mmusi Maimane says the placement of the 2 leaders on special leave was necessary to ensure accountability. However, question marks remain over how the spat will impact governance in the city.
Both the mayor and MMC J.P. Smith is to make sure that the climate is right. Put them on special leave so that I can ensure that this investigation that is going on can proceed, and we can truly focus on how do we build a city that delivers. I haven't suspended them from the city because in the midst of a water crisis that is of a national doing and no money there, they must continue to do that. We must make sure there's safety for the people of Cape Town. So the business of Cape Town must continue, and the investigation that's taking place must ensure that we do the right research.
And joining us in studio, Oliver Dixon, social political analyst. We have Zanele Luana, Deputy President of Black First and Land First. Good evening to you, and thanks so much for joining us. Is this a power struggle of just differing views, or is it more factionalism within the DA with the lead up to their provincial elective conference this weekend? And she just gives me this look.
I think it's very important for us to contextualize the role of Democratic Alliance in South Africa today, 23 years into democracy. And that Democratic Alliance remains a party that is predominantly white and has an agenda to protect white interests in this country. As we are seeing now with the issue of Patricia de Lille being placed immediately on special leave, I would wish leader Mmusi Maimane would have been this decisive in dealing with Helen Zille, and it had to take the pressure from the opposition and other voices in society to say, what are you going to say about, what are you going to do about Helen Zille, who continues to make comments about how colonialism was beneficial to black people. But it took long, and Zille is still premier of the Western Cape today, and obviously still has influence on how the party is run. This shows us that as much as DA is a white supremacist party, also the only corruption they are obsessed with, just like they are obsessed with how President Zuma runs the country, the only corruption that they recognize is corruption that implicates black people. Today in South Africa, where white settler minority group owns the means of production and the land of black people in this country, Democratic Alliance has nothing to say on that. Democratic Alliance has nothing to say on the recent comments made by Johan Rupert, for example, to say radical economic transformation is looting. They have nothing to say on that for as long as it maintains the status quo of the uneven ownership of resources in this country.
Yeah, okay, and I know there's a number of moving targets, especially in the hugely contested political space we find ourselves in, but internally all the parties, ANC and DA, seems to be showing the cracks, and that there are almost two sides or slates that are emerging. In this case, do you think that JP Smith and Patricia de Lille are being used as pawns in this political game? Oliver?
So the important context to set is that the Democratic Alliance is having their provincial Congress this Saturday. The reason they're having their provincial Congress this Saturday is because next year, March, they're having their national Congress, where they have to re-elect their federal executive commission. Importantly, there are three people vying for the position of provincial chair in the Western Cape. Bonginkosi Madikizela is running again, and he's contesting as his own successor there. But there are two other people who are participating, at least two other people who were trying to participate. Anda Ntodo was disqualified just the other day because the race submission was submitted after the cutoff date. There was a very dirty Facebook spat where councillors like Malusi actually came out and spoke out against Anda's apparent defiance of the provincial leadership. And then there's Leonard Mex, who's also running, who is a member of the provincial legislature in the Western Cape, in the Western Cape, but particularly serves in Cape Town. Importantly, what does that mean for what's currently happening in Cape Town at the moment? There are certain factions. Factions is the right word to use here because it is the case in the Western Cape. One, we've always known about Patricia de Lille's support for Bonginkosi Madikizela because the person who supported Bonginkosi Madikizela was Helen Zille directly, much like her support for the national leader, Mmusi Maimane, was also the case there. The person running against Bonginkosi is a man connected to JP Smith, and that man is Leonard Mex, a white gentleman who serves as an MPL member in the Western Cape. Now, these things, in the greater scheme of things, just means people are playing out politics, and that's fine. No one really cares. People are allowed to do that. But the danger here is that they're using state instruments and state resources to fight their personal political battles. What's been the case here, however, is that the attempt by Leonard Mex and his strength there being Mr. JP Smith the attempt has been to try and destabilize the alliance that exists between Patricia de Lille and Bonginkosi going forward into this provincial race. That means if you can discredit them based on alleged corruption, whether or not it's true, and I do think that there was misuse of funds in that instance. 104 is a lot of money considering that people in Langa don't have houses, that people in Philippi don't have houses. So 104,000 rand is a lot of money, and she must account for that. But what's really being happening here is that that battle is being played out so that one similar like we see with these elective processes, and that's the nature of what's happening over there. I think that misuse of funds must be taken under administration consideration by not only the government of the Western Cape but by Parliament as well.
Yeah. But what do you make of the stance, or if you want to call it intervention, by Mmusi Maimane by banning, if you will, or suspending the two leaders from party activity, and yet they are under suspicion of having flouted the Municipal Finance Management Act and the supply chain management procurement processes, and they're still in government, Zanele?
I think if there is a case of irregularities on how funds of the municipalities are being spent, the people who are involved must be dealt with. The council must deal with them and the party must deal with them. I have no problem with that. But there is the hypocrisy of the Democratic Alliance of looking at corruption as an act of black people. We know that the expenditure of the Western Cape as a whole is concentrated on white suburbs as compared to the black townships, as compared to, like, if we look at the livelihoods of our people in Khayelitsha, in Nyanga, in Marikana, in Makaza, is something totally the opposite of the livelihoods of white people who live in Constantia, who live in these affluent areas. And this is a deliberate act by the DA to preserve the gap between the rich and the poor, and we know that who is rich is white and those who are poor are black in the Western Cape. The DA has nothing to say on the priority, for example, of building cycling lanes, for example, while people in the townships have no toilets, have no basic services. The DA has nothing to say on how their businesses, as the party that governs the Western Cape, continues to benefit white businesses, and black businesses are constantly being put on the margins, and they do not get to enjoy the benefits that white businesses tend to. So it's very important for us to look at the hypocrisy, because this how DA is dealing with Patricia de Lille, how DA has dealt with Lindiwe Mazibuko, how DA has dealt with Mbali Ntuli, how DA is going to deal with Julius, how DA is going to deal with Mmusi Maimane is totally different than how they are going to deal with white people, because society had to create an uncertainty for DA to take a stand. Even when Mmusi Maimane took a stand to say, I'm suspending Helen Zille, the federal committee led by the white people who are in power in DA had to oppose that decision. So it's very important to say, obviously there is looting and there's corruption on how public institutions are run, and so is how the private sector is run in society. But DA has an agenda of victimizing black people, while Johan Rupert, the Oppenheimers, all their funders who are white, the corruption of Helen Zille, or arrogance of Helen Zille always gets away with no proper measures being taken against her.
And I will reiterate this, what I mentioned yesterday, in the sense that there are black people, or there were attempts to try and change the complexion of the party, and there are people who by choice would join the Democratic Alliance. And in the constitutional democracy where we are, some might feel that is derogatory of you to say that it's a white party. It's not a white party. What's your view in that regard, Oliver?
Okay, let's judge it objectively based on empirical evidence. 75% of the DA's parliamentary caucus is white. From that, 85% of them are white male. From the Democratic's entire parliamentary caucus, only 18% of them are black, and particularly only 9% of the entire parliamentary makeup of the caucus of the DA, 9% are black women. For a party that claims to care about black people, that should not be a number that represents the party. If you truly care about black people, then 9% is not the number of black women you would have on your caucus bench. So that's the first thing. Just by pure numbers, the DA has demonstrated to us that they do not care about black people. But that's the first thing. And I slightly want to disagree with Zanele because Zanele seems to think Mmusi Maimane took a stand. No, Mmusi Maimane did not take a stand. His actions were cosmetic at best because here we're talking about a mismanagement of state funds, not party funds, state funds. So the suspension of these officials should be from the state. The state in the Western, in Cape Town, is that Patricia de Lille should have been removed as the mayor of Cape Town. JP Smith should have been removed as the MMC of Safety and Security from Cape Town. These people still hold their official government positions. They just don't hold party positions. And what's so insignificant about the suspension is that, like, Patricia de Lille is absolutely nothing official in the party in Cape Town because she resigned in January. She resigned as the leader of the DA in Cape Town. She resigned and she was succeeded by Mr. August over there. So that means her suspension just means nothing. It means her membership card is ineffective and she can't vote in a branch. That's all that it means. But it still means that she yields public funds, that she makes decisions over how public funds are being spent. To ask the question, will the governance of the day then take a hit? Will governance become inefficient if you remove these people, which was Mmusi Maimane's response? No, governments won't take a hit. The water crisis is a real crisis. Yes, and Mmusi Maimane correctly puts it out. National government is responsible for the water crisis in the Western Cape now. That's almost undisputed. But importantly, if you remove Patricia de Lille, the governance of the day would not take a hit because the governance of the day was never the governance of the people. The Western Cape municipality is the municipality of Rondebosch, of Constantia, not the municipality of Philippi and Kailicha and Mitchell's Plain. So poor people would have remained in the same position if you removed Patricia de Lille.
Yeah, but these public spats, is this for you as a part of a catalyst to the build-up to the elective conference, a provincial elective conference over the weekend, or do you think the cracks had always been there?
The cracks have always been there, but I think we must be clear that it's the white majority in the Democratic Alliance that calls the shot. And they would do anything to deal with any black person that is the member of the party who stands in their way. That's why so many black people who were prominent leaders of the Democratic Alliance are nowhere to be found now. Because whenever you stand in the way of DA advancing the agenda of white monopoly capital, the Democratic Alliance is going to deal with you, just like they are doing with Patricia de Lille. But I think it's also important for us to not get seduced by a few hundred. It's about 100,000, which is the money that is being linked to the security upgrades to the mayor, which is Patricia de Lille. But we should look at Democratic Alliance as a political arm of white monopoly capital in this country, and that we have cartels who dominate the economy of this country. And the DA has no agenda to expose them because it's corruption that is worth billions, that is worth livelihoods of our own people, and that would not be in... DA exposing that corruption would not be in line with their agenda because we know that the agenda of the National Party during apartheid was to always keep black people outside, marginalize them and exploit them in their own country. This is the same agenda of the Democratic Alliance today. The Democratic Alliance has nothing to say on the cashiers of ShopRite who were recently taken to court for taking tips, while the owner of ShopRite, who is white, is paying our people slave wage. The Democratic Alliance has nothing to say on the looting of 4.3 billion from the National Treasury. If we look at the Democratic Alliance has nothing to say on the 26 billion that is still being investigated by the Office of the Public Protector that was looted out of the South African Reserve Bank, because this is white corruption, this is big corruption. We're talking about multi-billions that could be used to change the livelihoods of our people, but DA will never do that. So now, if we speak about holding public servants accountable and then we ignore everything else and we say Patricia de Lille must be dealt with, well, there is a long list of white people who are being supported by DA, banks who are being supported by DA, retailers,
and I think,
farmers
and I think that gives impetus to the
DA
extending the scope
to expose that corruption.
Zanele, I think that gives impetus to extending the scope of investigating state capture as opposed to just limiting it to the state of capture report. And on that part, I will agree with you. But then coming back to just the demeanor and how the DA has always portrayed itself, I think what's recently emerged could be a surprise to many that, in fact, internally they've had their own either factions or whether they want to admit to it. Is it just differences on ideology or implementation of projects? What is exactly going on?
The last time the DA had a smooth transition of leadership anyway was when Tony Leon literally handed over the reins to Helen Zille. This was a white man handing over the leadership of the party to a white woman. It was celebrated. But when Helen Zille did that for Mmusi Maimane, it wasn't quite as well celebrated because the white people internally in the DA fought against it. But again, that was cosmetic. And I think Mmusi Maimane is a smart person, a great person, and I think he really cares for South Africans. I just don't think his party cares for South Africans. Importantly here, you then have to ask yourself, who is the real power in the Democratic Alliance? It is John Steenhuisen. It is David Meinier. This is why John Steenhuisen and David Meinier came out and spoke against Mmusi Maimane when he suspended Helen Zille. That was a clear indication of the cracks within the party, that the party is drawn along racial lines, that the party is drawn along ideological line. The ideological line is it is the protection of whiteness. The DA exists solely for the protection of whiteness. This is why so much money, for instance, is being spent on deploying police on Long Street, but far less money is being spent on deploying police in townships within Cape Town. And that ideological line, while it seems like a mismanagement of funds, is drawn along racial line because it is the rich people of Constantia that funds the Democratic Alliance. It is the people of Rondebosch. It is the people of Kirstenbosch Gardens who fund the Democratic Alliance, and that's where they will go back and spend their money. So those racial lines must be acknowledged. And
I suppose the law now to ratify political parties having to declare and expose their funders is now over, because I think you've just clarified as to where the money comes from, so we can put that to rest. But let's just come back to, especially with the elective conference, the provincial conference of the DA, and what that would mean possibly for the ANC, who's found themselves in the opposition for years on end. I mean, I think the first elections, they were in power and haven't been able to regain that. Is there a window of opportunity?
There should be a window of opportunity. If there's no window of opportunity, it must be created, because it cannot be that a racist white DA is governing Western Cape today and the lives of our people have not changed. And I do know that the lives of our people have not changed in the country, in the rest of the country as a whole. But a racist party such as the DA, who Helen Zille is still repeating today that there are still good positive aspects on colonialism. She still repeats that today. So DA is a party that does not care about the plight of black people. And I would say the progressive layer of the African National Congress that is advocating for radical economic transformation today and the return of land to the people must mobilize in the Western Cape and take over that province. But I wanted to also add one more thing on how do we motivate that DA still remains a white racist party today? For example, I know the DA has a protest tomorrow. We must all watch, or in fact do a literal count. How many white people are going to be in that protest? And I can tell you now that they are going to be a small minority, and most of our people, like me and you, are going to be mobilized to advance an agenda of white people that is not going to benefit
very briefly.
us.
And I mean,
as black
we need to
people.
make this disclaimer that these are your views and not necessarily the views of the channel, that the DA is a racist party. That's number one. Secondly, it could be strategy versus what you deem as being a racist party. Strategy in preserving white interests as opposed to racism.
No, the DA is a racist party. They believe in free market economics. Free market economics has presented itself to be anti-black in all ways possible. Free market economics says businesses must compete, and they must compete with no actual support as to how businesses ought to compete in a free market. So the DA will tell you they believe in BE, but they really only believe in free market competition. That is inherently racist. So that's a fact. It's not quite opinion. So I think Zanele is 100% correct in that. But importantly, to demonstrate that the DA continues to be racist, we have to bring back the numbers of their parliamentary caucus. 9% of that is black female. And I think importantly here, the distinction that needs to be made between the Democratic Alliance in the Western Cape and the Democratic Alliance nationally is that the behavior of the Democratic Alliance in the Western Cape is worrying, because there it's not an opposition party, it's the governing party. I think if there's a window of opportunity for an opposition to creep up in the Western Cape, it exists for the EFF, because it's the EFF who went and actually reclaimed, like occupied a land land and they got shot and they were chased away by the white police officers over there. So I think they've gained that sort of credibility on bringing up the land issue as most important. So I think that's where the window of opportunity is going to come up. And we've seen that that was like a court case that Julius Malema is still fighting in court today.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Thanks indeed to our panelists, Oliver Dixon, social political analyst, and Zanele Luana, deputy president of Black First, the Land First. I just had to get that in, you know, and I'm sure it resonates with our viewers. And thanks to you at home for watching as well. Do stay tuned for ANC Decides just after this.